in this section. Absolutely.
Tier 3, is that, if you reach tier 3, is there still power going to?
Yeah, there's still power going, but it's not as efficient. I would just say, when we get down to that level.
Did I read somewhere that that's going to happen maybe in 2025?
I thought it was 26, but still not
Short-
far.
short
Not
term.
yeah, short term. Short term. I just tell everybody pray for snow, and even though I, kind of explained how it doesn't always translate to the outcome that we might want, but I believe it was 3 years ago. 3 years ago, we had almost 200% of the average snowfall translated, and it's what kept us out of tier 1 for a full year. So there are weather events that can have an effect on the system in a positive way. So we can just hope for that.
Just one more. So what happened to the 80% that went down to 30? Where'd that water go?
Evaporating.
It did that.
Yeah. And also soaks in. Because it's.
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. The question was what happened to the 80% snowfall normal, and only 30% made it to the reservoir. So there's a couple of things. One, the drought, the snow melted and just soaked in and did not run off, and some of it is through evaporation. So it's kind of a combination, but the earth drinks it first. It kind of takes it in in that. Great questions. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry.
I used to live near the 14,000 foot peaks in Colorado. A lot of it's sublime. You get very high winds. You can see all that snow blowing off the peaks. That goes directly from snow, water vapor, and blows away.
Mhm.
Never even gets into the air.
Right. Yeah.
So in a windy year, and that's most of them.
Yes, and there's that incident as well. Any other questions? Any questions from the audience that's online?
Yes, this is Ron Vibert. Thank you for the presentation. I think that I just moved here from the upper Midwest where we don't have near the constraints on water that we do here. But one of the things that you had mentioned, and I guess is in terms of a kind of more of an economic type question, it seems like there's a trade-off there between the amount of water you can store and then the amount of power that can be generated. And at some point, is there a study that says, we have to stop doing something or become more energy efficient, or figure out a way of becoming more water efficient, because there seems like there's a trade-off there that's not quite clear to me yet. Is that something that you arm wrestle with the power companies about?
Well, I'm going to answer a little bit of that, but may need some help from Mitch on that. But yes, we do. I don't want to say we arm wrestle, and we're constantly in contact with them on our production availability, and also negotiating, because we need a lot of power to operate. So I'll let Mitch kind of take it from there.
Hi, I'm Mitch Basefsky. I work for Steve as part of the CAP staffer. So there is a real connection. There's a nexus between electricity, power, and water. What happens is some years ago, Lake Mead at Hoover Dam, the Bureau of Reclamation replaced the turbines that generate electricity so that they can generate electricity at many, many levels until the reservoir absolutely gets too low for the water to pour into the turbines. But every foot of decrease in elevation of Lake Mead means 5 kilowatts or 5 megawatts, something like that, less power that they can generate. So there's a real connection. The more concern is the level in Lake Powell behind the Glen Canyon Dam, because they have a cutoff point that they're within 50 or so feet of this cutoff point right now. Below that cutoff point, below that elevation in Lake Powell, they cannot generate any electricity. It doesn't go down on a scale like Mead does. So our biggest concern is whether or not that will be able to be propped up to stay above minimum power pool, we call it. In terms of what we do with water, we are even though we're the largest electricity user, we're very efficient. We generate power from our Lake Pleasant pumping station during summer months. We also have a solar power generating station out in the west end so that we can get some power off of that. And our operators pump power at times of day when other people are not using a lot of power. That's not only cheaper for us, but it's also, it doesn't strain the grid. There's power available for us to pump. I'll let Ralvuca talk about conservation and how reduction in demand for water really can have an impact on power use as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a great question, though, and I'm glad you asked it, because the power thing is kind of not seen as important, but it is an important component. See if somebody will check that.
Feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay, so here's a question. With all of the new housing that is going in Peralta and potentially south of Highway 60, what is the forecast for water? Is there enough water to support this new development in this area?
I'm gonna leave some of that to Terri Sue, because I think if you saw that slide, really the cap water that's used in this area is relatively a small percentage of their total delivery. And that's where Arizona Water will have to get in and figure where and how much. And she'll talk more in detail about how they will manage growth and be able to deliver, not manage the growth, but be able to deliver water to the growing community.
And I'm going to be giving a presentation here in just a minute, and I'm going to get into that into more detail. So if I don't answer your question during the presentation, then we can circle back around after my presentation.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
I also saw a question in the chat related to where the wells are for Arizona Water Company, and I wanted to let you all know that will be addressed in the next presentations as well.
Are we ready for the next presentation?
Are we ready?
Go to the next presentation.
Lovely.
And
So while that's getting queued up, yes, it's the final one. I believe you actually already have it pulled up.
this one?
Yes. Yep. So feel free to jump to slide 4. Lisa, please.
1, 2, 3.
Oh, yes, that one. Perfect. So our next speaker is going to be Terri Sue Rossi, our Water Resources Manager.
Hang on.
And
Can they see it?
are you able to see the presentation mode?
Would you put in presentation mode and then select that screen?
I'm not sure if you actually started sharing your screen again.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think you have to put in the presentation.
Yes.
Where she has to share it.
Yeah. So yep. And then
All right.
you have to pull it up
So
again.
share screen.
Yeah.
Go
Go ahead and
pull
pull
up
up
the
the presentation again. Lisa.
I'm sure that's.
Oh, no. Exit out of this window. There we go. And then pull up the presentation from the file drive.
That's
Yes, that
all
one.
right.
Mhm.
Open it up
Perfect.
And then put in presentation.
And then put it in presentation.
and then share.
Darn it. Slideshow.
So where it says 2 over to the left, a little further left on the top.
Design.
Now to the right. You'll see, keep going, one more,
Keep going.
Yeah.
No, keep
one
going,
more.
keep going.
one
Slideshow. There it is.
From current slide. from current slide.
From this.
Yes, and then jump
Perfect.
to a few over.
Now
actually.
share your screen.
Didn't I just already share my
No,
screen?
you had to unshare it. You had to share this particular.
Yeah. Screen 2.
Oh, screen 2?
Yes. Perfect. Okay, so can everyone see? It should say Arizona Water Company Superstition System Gold Canyon. Can everyone see that?
Want to unmute and let us know?
Yes, please.
And Lisa, if you could advance the slides, one more. Yeah, stop there and then let's see if we got everybody.
Okay,
Are we able to see? Is anyone giving feedback, Lisa, that they're able to see the slides?
all I see is your slides.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Okay, perfect, thank
Okay,
you.
Amazing. So Terri Sue will give her presentation, and then we're going to jump into my presentation. So if we can hold off on questions until the end of my presentation, that would be great.
Okay, if we could advance the slide one. Thank you, Lisa. So Arizona Water Company holds 4 CAP subcontracts. The CAP subcontracts are the contracts that Steve was referring to. And these are the locations where we hold those subcontracts. And we're going to be focusing on the subcontract that we hold for our Superstition Water System in parts of this presentation. And so the volume of that subcontract is 6,285 acre feet. All of our contracts combined are just a little bit over 18,000 acre feet. If we could advance to the next slide. Oh, and I guess I was going to say this next. We're going to focus in this area. See, when I don't control my own PowerPoint, it's hard for me to come with it. All right, so we'll go on and we'll hone in a little bit closer into the Superstition Water System. So next slide, please. So here's a little bit of a close-up. So we're very large service area. Bill, remind me how big it is. It about 150, 160 square miles?
Yes.
Okay. So it's about 150 to 160 square miles. We serve Apache Junction, we serve Gold Canyon, we serve the Superior area. And as I'm sure most of you know, there's not a whole lot going on in between Gold Canyon and Superior. So we'll move to the next slide and we'll show you where our water lines are at and where our wells are at. So Ralvuca mentioned that we were going to show you where the wells are. And the wells are where those white dots are. So we have 3 pumping centers, one up in the Apache Junction area, one in what we refer to as Navajo Station, that's roughly in the Ranch 160 area. And then we have wells down in Florence Junction. And then you can see our water lines there as well. We're going to hone in a little bit closer into Gold Canyon itself. And this is the blue lines that you see on there are our water lines. And then we're going to go to the next slide and we're going to talk about kind of the sources of supply. So I think one of the questions you guys had for us was what are the sources of water supply that we're using? I don't remember if you asked for the demand, but we're going to talk about the demand a little bit too. In the Superstition Water System, there are 3 water supply sources available. One is groundwater, one is CAP water, and one is effluent. The total demand in the Superstition Water System is 10,661 acre feet. And actually, it's a little bit more than that because I don't think I included Superior in that number. So it's probably a little over 11,000 acre feet. And the amount of water that's used in Gold Canyon is that bottom number, which is 4,913 acre feet. So I mentioned that we use CAP water and we use groundwater. So the way that we use our CAP water is 2 different ways. So we have the direct delivery of CAP water, and that's largely used in Gold Canyon. There is one golf course in Apache Junction, but the vast majority of it is used in Gold Canyon. And that's about 3,000 acre feet of direct use, or what we would call raw CAP water. And then the rest of the potable demands that are met with groundwater. And then the remaining CAP water we store in what we call groundwater savings facilities and recharge projects, and we recover it from those wells that we just talked about a few minutes ago.
Terri Sue, can you go over really quickly what the unit that you're using is an acre foot?
Thank you. Yeah, so these are the unit is in acre feet, and an acre foot is typically, people consider that to be the amount of water that you put over, say, a football field that's about a foot deep. And out in the Gold Canyon area, Ralvuca, can you help me remind me of how many homes that is? Is that about 3 or 4 homes in the Gold Canyon area?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so it represents about enough demand to serve 3 or 4 homes within a year. So that's what an acre foot is that's about what that volume equals. Thank you for pointing that out. The residential to non-residential split is pretty heavy on the residential side in the water system as a whole, Superstition system as a whole, and in Gold Canyon as well. And that's in terms of accounts. And then in terms of deliveries, you would see the same thing. So it's about 1,500 acre feet is delivered to residential, and about 366 acre feet is delivered to non-residential. And again, there's about 3,000 acre feet that's delivered to Gold Canyon. And actually that number is incorrect, because when I put this together, I was thinking the 4th golf course is here in Gold Canyon, but it's actually not. So it's probably more like around 2,500 acre feet. So I apologize for that error. I'll fix that slide before we give you the final version. So let's go to the next slide. And I want to talk a little bit about how this recharge and recovery thing works. So when we say we use CAP water, we use it directly. And then I think the other word we used was recovered CAP. And so what that means is that we take our CAP water and we deliver it to groundwater savings facilities that are nearby and recharge projects. And then that water percolates into the ground, and we recover it from those wells that we own and operate. So over to the left of the screen, you'll see 3 irrigation districts. There's RWCD, there's Queen Creek in the middle, and then there is New Magma Irrigation District. So the first one, RWCD, is Roosevelt Water Conservation District. So we store some water at Roosevelt Water Conservation District, and then we also store water at a recharge facility that was constructed by Mitch's organization, the CAP, also Steve's organization sits on that board. And this one's a little tough to see in the picture, but if you look at the bottom irrigation district, you'll look over the CAP kind of goes, I wish I had one of those little pointers, those little laser pointers, but you'll see the CAP is running kind of right down the middle of the screen, and it comes to the edge of those irrigation districts. And the turquoise irrigation district, right across the line, you'll see 2 tiny bright blue, look like lakes. That's actually a recharge project, and that's the Superstition Recharge Project. So there are 2 types of facilities: groundwater savings facilities, and then what we call an underground storage facility, or what we commonly refer to as a recharge project. In the underground storage facility, what happens is our CAP water comes down that canal and it's discharged into those little lakes, and the water percolates into the ground. It creates this big mound under the ground, and then we recover that water from our wells. The irrigation districts, it works a little different. What we do is we deliver water to the irrigation districts, and they stop pumping. And so the water they would have pumped stays in the ground, and that's the water that we recover out of the ground. So that's how we use our CAP water for potable purposes. The reason that we do that is because we are able to do that, and it costs a lot less money for our customers than if we would actually build a water treatment plant. That doesn't mean that at some point in time we won't want to build a water treatment plant, but for now, this is a good solution. It provides a cost-effective water supply to our customers. So we'll go to the next slide. So the other water supply we talked about was effluent. So Arizona Water Company is not a sewer provider. We do not recharge effluent, and we do not recover effluent ourselves. But Liberty Utilities operates a sewer company called Gold Canyon. I'm sure you're all familiar with that particular facility. It treats all the wastewater in the Gold Canyon area. They recharge that water in the ground that they do not use, and then they deliver a certain amount of that water to the local golf courses. And I believe that this graphic shows how much water is delivered to those golf courses. So in 2017, it was about 77 acre feet. And in 2020, it was about almost 300 acre feet. Let's move to the next slide. So now what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about the Colorado River shortage stuff. And Steve talked about this at a higher level. I'm going to come down to a really close to the ground level and talk about how that works within our water system, how that works within our community, and specifically within Gold Canyon. So to begin with, what I want to communicate is that there are a lot of organizations that are involved in studying the impacts of the shortages on the Colorado River, not studying the hydrology of the Colorado River Basin that Steve talked about, and how that translates into how much water will actually get down into the valley. So the Bureau of Reclamation is involved, the Department of Water Resources, the Central Arizona Project, the Arizona Water Banking Authority, which you probably never heard of, plays a critical role, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. The Groundwater Replenishment District that Steve referred to, and all of the CAP users. So that would be people like Arizona Water Company, anybody who holds a CAP subcontract or contract. And we are involved at all levels of this planning. So as a customer, we get involved in anything the Bureau does, Department of Water Resources, CAP. One of the things that I would recommend is if you're interested in understanding more about this, you can go online and listen to and watch any CAP board meeting and learn a great deal about how all of these things do. It's almost like you're a mini board member yourself. So shortage modeling and its impact is conducted on a number of different levels. And if you wanted to understand more about that, that could be a 3-hour conversation in and of itself. And at the end of that, you would probably just realize how much more you would need to know. So we're not going to really talk about it. Suffice it to say that there are multiple models, multiple organizations involved. And then once it's been determined, essentially that all the modeling sort of reduces down to how much water we think is going to come down the Colorado River. And when we know how much water is going to come down the Colorado River, then we do a whole different set of modeling to figure out the volume that enters into the CAP system, how much is going to be available to each user. And once we've figured that out, then the water bank comes into play. The water bank is an organization. And the only reason I can talk a little bit more in depth about the water bank is because I worked for the water bank for a number of years myself, so I happen to have direct experience with it. But the water bank's job has been since 1997 to store water underground, to store excess CAP water underground, so that one day when this shortage comes, which we knew would eventually come, that there would be an ample amount of water stored underground that would operate essentially as an insurance policy. And so that's the role of the water bank. And they put together a 10-year plan, and that's all part of defining how much water, how much our CAP water is going to be reduced in any particular year. Then there's a bunch of things that they call recovery planning. I mentioned to you that what we do is recovered CAP, and that's just a way of saying that's how we're going to get those credits out of the ground. And then in short, what we're going to do, what we plan to do is we're going to rely on the water bank to backfill whatever our CAP entitlement is going to be shorted. And then we're going to, of course, implement otherwise water resource strategies, which Ralvuca will talk about conservation, and we're going to talk about a few more. So let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk a little bit more about the bank so that you understand the importance of the role of the bank. There's a lot of talk about Colorado River shortages, but not a lot of talk about the bank. And the bank, in my opinion, is kind of plays a very important role. So I mentioned that the bank is essentially an insurance policy. So, but instead of it being money, it's actually water. So basically we have this 4 million acre foot insurance policy that's under the ground that we can then underwrite Colorado River shortages with. And as I mentioned, their mission is to store, has been in the past, to store as much unused CAP water as possible to build that insurance policy to the point of where it will work for us for a long time. And they do that by recharging into those facilities that we talked about, the underground storage facilities, the groundwater savings facilities. And to date, they stored 4 million acre feet, but some of it is stored for Nevada. So about 3.7 million 5 acre feet of it is stored for Arizona. And when I worked for the bank, we used to talk about, well, when are the vaults of the bank going to open for the first time? We now know the vaults of the bank are going to open in 2022. But it's only going to affect what we call tribal non-Indian agricultural waters, which seems kind of contradictory, but it's what it is a type of priority that was at the time called NIN. That means just sort of stuck with it. So don't mind the name. It's just a slightly lower level of priority below what we call the M&I subcontracts and the tribal contracts. So so the shortage is going to go into that particular pool. And when it goes into that pool, then the water bank has a responsibility to firm the River Indian community. And then the other thing the bank does is they partner with other organizations in order to recover those long-term storage credits. And we'll talk about how Arizona Water Company is going to do that. So if we go to the next slide.
Lisa, are you able to?
There's somebody who wants to be admitted. So I mentioned earlier that we have 4 subcontracts totaling just over 18,000 acre feet. And these are the different, it's locked out. So.
Yeah, it's locked out. I believe that it is.
So I'm just gonna keep talking while they figure out how to let poor Tammy in. But, so anyways, we have the 6,285 acre foot allocation in our Superstition Water System, and we have some in our other water systems. And in July of this past year, the Arizona Water Banking Authority released its most recent 10-year plan. And in that 10-year plan, it shows when the shortages are expected to occur and at what tier. So this gets to a question that I think we had earlier about tier 3 and when that first tier 3 is going to happen. And according to the Water Bank's 10-year report, the first tier 3 shortage would actually occur in 2025. Now, I really want to emphasize that this is modeling. Okay, so these are not facts. These are projections that we're making, and it changes from year to year, and it changes from month to month. So each month, the Bureau of Reclamation does a whole system of modeling, and they re-predict everything every single month. And I do not know exactly where it's at right now. I didn't have a chance to look at the probabilities of whether 2025 is still high probability or if it's pushed to 2026. It changes pretty much every 3 months. It changes because it's just at that point of the planning process. But these are the volumes that when they took the volume of Colorado River water that was going to be at the top of the system, and we figured out how much water was going to be used in the system, this is the amount of water that we shorted. So on the low end, it's about 28,000 acre feet. And on the high end, in 2029, it's just under 100,000 acre feet. So to give you some perspective, that volume of water is relative to, in terms of, and this is only applicable to M&I subcontractors. And Mitch, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this number, but we're talking about roughly 630,000 acre feet of M&I subcontracts. And so the 100,000 represents about 1/6 of that volume. So if we go to the next slide, I'll show you specifically how that then impacts our particular systems. So the range of impact on us based on those numbers that we talked about on the low end is about 4%, and on the high end is about 15%. In terms of absolute numbers, we're looking at about 800 acre feet versus 2,800 acre feet. And so our basic strategy, and assuming that we would go into a shortage in 2025 where we would need to respond to that, our basic strategy at this point would be to protect our direct deliveries that we talked about, that 3,000 acre feet, and then we would allow the water bank to provide us with long-term storage credits, and we would recover that. So if we go to the next slide, and that the method that we would be using is something we call independent recovery. So the water bank would distribute those long-term storage credits to us, and we would recover.
We would recover those credits from the wells that we talked about earlier. So is that happening because of this?
So we're getting a little bit of an echo here. Not now, it seems to stop. Okay, so then we will take and recover those credits from the wells that we showed you on the map earlier. And we're going to do that until 2026 because the water bank has agreed to cover any shorted amounts on the river that affect M&I subcontractors until that time. After 2026, the water bank may just make a decision to continue to do that, or it may go back to its original policy, which would be to only replace about 20% of that. So let's move on to the next slide. So other expected impacts that we would realize is that when there's a shortage, less water is coming down the system. So there's some basic fixed costs that basically the cost of running the Central Arizona project, kind of like our cost in our home. We have a mortgage, whether we're in the home or not, we're going to pay the mortgage, right? So we have fixed costs in our lives. And so when you have less water coming through the system, that means the cost per unit to deliver that water is going to go up. So one of the things that we expect is that our fixed cost for operating the Central Arizona project are going to go up as less water is delivered. The other thing we know is going to happen is that there'll be a curtailment of CIP water deliveries because there's less water. And that means that those irrigation districts that you saw in that other picture are not going to get as much water as they would otherwise have. That's going to lead to increased groundwater pumping on those who rely on the CIP, and the increased, I gotta catch up with you here because sometimes I can't see over people's heads. So it's a slide, so that's okay, no worries. And then when the groundwater pumping increases, then we're going to potentially see some water level declines that could lead to the cost of pumping increasing. It could lead to well deepening and replacement. And of course, it's going to have impacts on the agricultural economy. We do not think that the increased groundwater pumping is something that will happen dramatically or rapidly. So this would be over a decade or 2 decades that we would start to see these things happening. So let's go ahead to the next slide. So what is Arizona Water Company doing to protect its water supplies? Well, one of the things that we do is we monitor groundwater levels. And that's some of the work that Bill Staples and his crew do. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, you guys do that at least twice a year.
Yes.
And you get out and they measure the water levels in every single well that we operate. And so we keep very close tabs on what's going on with the groundwater table in the areas where we have our wells. We conduct a lot of hydrologic studies, and those hydrologic studies are based on trying to figure out what's going on under the ground, and how much groundwater is physically available, what's the movement of the groundwater, what are the impacts of our wells on the overall hydrology in the area, and that kind of thing. The other thing we do, and Ralvuca is going to talk about this a lot more, is we develop and maintain water conservation programs. And I'm not going to steal any of her thunder because she's got a wonderful presentation, and I want her to be able to do that. The other thing that we do is we are currently, and will continue to work with some of our Rossi water users to shift to alternative supplies, because the CIP subcontracts need to be, the primary priority of the CIP contracts is for the potable customers. And so we need to get our Rossi water customers to use as much, say, for example, effluent as they possibly can. Let's see here. So the other objective that we have, even though we are not a sewer provider, is to try to fully utilize reclaimed water that's generated by Arizona Water Company customers. So we work with sewer providers in the area to try to accomplish that objective. We also participate in regional water protection supply efforts, things like the drought contingency plan that Steve referred to. There's now an Arizona reconsultation process. Anything involving the water bank and recovery planning, we participate in all of those activities. The other thing that we do, but not frequently, is we replace existing wells, and then more commonly we drill new wells. So as new development comes in, they bring new water production into the system, and we get new wells put into service. In the future, we are hoping to actually shift our business to include sewer service. And once we are in control of the sewer service, then we'll have a lot more control of using those resources within the communities where that water is produced. We also participate in water supply development projects. One that you may or may not be familiar with, but that you might want to have a speaker come and talk about, is the Salt River Project is going through a feasibility study to raise Bartlett Dam. And that could create about 100,000 acre-feet of water, I believe. And so that would probably be a very interesting study for you guys to talk about, because you would be a prime recipient of a beneficiary of that kind of water. Then the other thing we do is we require development for renewable water supplies, and that's kind of a part of the development. Which brings us to the next slide, which is to talk about the Assured Water Supply Program. So the way that water is managed relative to growth in the state of Arizona is through something we call an Assured Water Supply Program. And I'm going to just talk about it at a very, very super high level. And I would recommend that if you guys want to learn more about that you bring somebody from the Arizona Department of Water Resources, and they can spend hours talking to you about the Assured Water Supply Program. It's a very involved program. But essentially what it is that in the state of Arizona, in certain groundwater basins, what we call active management areas, you cannot subdivide and sell land for residential or commercial purposes unless you have proven an assured water supply. And an assured water supply has several criteria that are listed here. The water has to be physically available, it has to be continuously available, it has to be legally available, it has to be of an adequate water quality. The developer and the water provider have to be financially capable of providing that water to subdivision. And it has to be something that we call consistent with the management plan and goal. And consistent with the management plan is that it has to be meeting conservation requirements. Consistency with the management goal is that it has to be consistent with the goal in that AMA, which in this active management area is safe yield, where the amount of water going in to the aquifer does not, the amount of water going out of the aquifer does not exceed the amount of water going into the aquifer. So
One thing I want to add to that is Canal County is kind of unique in that it has, actually has 3 AMAs within it. Those AMAs follow under, well, the Phoenix and Tucson are similar, but the Canal AMA, where I live, has been kind of the epicenter, has a different set of rules, and is where these assured waters have become a real challenge.
yes,
And I just kind of wanted to pop that in there, because if you hear something about down in my district, that's kind of under a different set of rules than the rules up here.
Yeah.
So anyway,
yeah, because
It-
goal is located inside the Phoenix active management area, and Steve's talking about the areas in the Canal active management area. But there are similar, there's a lot of similarities between the two programs, but different geologic and hydrologic realities, and some slightly different rules.
And so this is to kind of get on the topic of development that kind of came up.
Yes,
That's where
Yeah.
this information is coming from.
yeah,
and I think it's interesting because people hear something, but it might not be, it might be something happening down by my area and doesn't apply here. So you just kind of have to understand that there's 3 different AMAs.
situational.
Situational, yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah,
But for clarity, because, you hear something, then you have to get it in context and where it really is relevant.
yeah. And even within a particular active management area, there is a lot of diversity in the hydrology. And so one subdivision may get its approvals, but another might not, depending on the hydrology. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. And so this slide is just describing in your particular area some of the details of the assured water supply program. So Arizona Water Company is what we call a certificate-based system. So there's sort of 2 ways to get an assured water supply. You can have a water provider who becomes designated as having an assured water supply, and that's like an umbrella assured water supply status. And then any subdivision that comes in is approved and you're on your way. Arizona Water Company is not a designated water provider, and so the alternative method is for each developer to go out and get their own certificate of assured water supply. And there's a lot of debate about which one is more strict, but I will tell you, I work for both designated and certificate-based, and certificate-based systems are much more strict because every single subdivision is analyzed, whereas in a designated-based system, it's analyzed at a much higher level. So there's a lot more scrutiny on the certificate-based systems. Now, those who operate designated systems would tell you that that's not true, but I've worked for both, and I know the difference of the levels. So there are 75 certificates of assured water supply that have been issued in the Gold Canyon area. They represent about 6,000 lots, and about 4,400 lots have been built. And there's about 3,300 acre feet of groundwater that's pledged on those assured water supply purposes, or pledged for assured water supply purposes. And what that means is that every single one of those certificates was able to prove that the water that was going to be served to their subdivision, that 100 years of that water is available. Now, you might recall back to the slide where we talked about the demand. The demand out here is a lot less than that 3,300 acre feet. So, and part of that is because it's not completely built out, but part of it is because when they put together these estimates for the certificates, they are very conservative, meaning they overestimate how much water they're going to need. We found that to be consistently true on the order of probably 60 to 70%. The actual demand is probably more like about 60 to 70% of the assured water supply demand. So the other thing that we have as an organization is something called a physical availability determination. And what that is it's more like something that you would do for a designation, but it's for certificate-based providers. And we take and figure out how much groundwater is available in our entire area within that CCNM. And we've done several physical availability determinations, and we currently have 16,000 acre feet per year that has been approved in our current physical availability determination. That is above and beyond the existing and what we would call committed demands in our area. So all those existing committed demands have already been proven to be modeled to show that there would be 100 years worth of groundwater for them. And then we have proven that there's another 16,000 acre feet per year of water available. And when I say 16,000 acre feet, what I mean is when you look at a model, that's 100 years, so it's like 16 million acre feet of water that's available in the aquifer. So a lot of people don't realize that the aquifers in Arizona are very abundant in terms of the volume of water that's available. All right, now.
Yes, so that was a lot of information. Thank you so much, Terri Sue, for going over that. I know that I had originally said that it would be good to go through the demand management program and then do questions. But if we keep it to maybe 10 or 15 minutes, I think we can take some questions just because that was a lot of really great information. I don't want to lose anyone's questions if they have them. So does anyone have questions about the water resources?
For the storage, what's the efficiency? You've surely done a lot of hydrology.
When you say the
Let's
storage
say
of
over
the
the
charge,
What percentage can you recover?
so
So we've got some echo going on. So it's an involved answer. And if you guys want to learn more about the storage and recovery program, I could recommend somebody from the DWR. But the quick answer is that we model that information to figure out what the evaporation is. And then we also have to tack on what we call a 5% cut to the aquifer. It generally is around 8% to 10% is lost in that process. Yeah.
You're on. Hello, it's Dale. Okay, I go back to one of my other questions that I asked earlier, and that is that it said that we're going to trigger a tier 3 water issue in 2025, and that's with the existing homes. And then we go into saying that, well, there's going to be, maybe 10 to 15,000 new homes in this area. And that doesn't consider some of the other rest of the development in Phoenix that's going to take maybe some of that water. And then we say that these new developments that you're saying there's a 100-year water supply. So I see that there's to me, it seems like there's a disconnect between the tier 3 issue in 2025 and the number of 100 years for the existing development in this area. That's one question, and this is more of a statement. I come from Canada. I live on the largest freshwater body of water in the world, Lake Superior. And you would think, oh wow, hey man, you've got some good cheap water. Well, that's not the case. We pay approximately $1,200 a year for our water, and I think the cost of water in this area pales in comparison. And yet we are in an area where we're talking drought, tier 1, tier 3, 25, water issues. We're talking low snowfall, low water. So I see a disconnect in that regard. And is there something that we can put in place now, or maybe we should have had it already in place, in increasing the cost of the water so that people are a little more frugal? So anyways, that's two questions. Sorry about that.
One thing I just want to make sure that I clarify is that the number that I gave, the 16,000, was not housing units. That's a volume of water that we determined was physically available. And then the other thing I would like to clarify is that the tier 3.
I can't hear you. You're muted. You're muted. I can't hear you.
Are you muted?
No.
You need to unmute.
Am I okay now?
You're great now. Thank you. I didn't, I
What I
missed what
wanted to
you,
say is that the 16,000 number that I talked about was not housing units. It was volume of water. And
No,
so
I-
it wasn't, there, I did not say that we're gonna grow by 16,000 units. The growth in the Bull Canyon area, I don't have a specific number on what that is, but we could look at what our customer growth has been and give you an idea of what that would be.
Of what that would be.
yeah.
But it would definitely not be 16,000 units in a couple of years. I can say that.
Exactly. So I guess my biggest concern is that we want to stay here for the next 20 years.
Yeah.
And here I'm hearing that we have a tier 3 water issue potentially in 2025, which basically is, in water terms, it's here. Basically, it's here. Forget the 3 or 4 years. So what can we do now to push that out so that we don't get into a tier 3? Like right now we're tier 1, and there's nothing to say we're not going to get to a tier 3 quicker than 2025 based on the graphs that I presently have been shown today.
So
The other thing I want to point out is that the tiers are applicable to Colorado River water only. So we use Colorado River water, but we also use
groundwater. In fact, our primary supply is supply in the event that the water bank cannot meet the shortage in the Colorado River water. And in 2025, while there will be a tier 3 shortage in that
groundwater.
year,
In fact, our primary supply is
4%.
also our backup supply in the shortage in the Colorado River 3 shortage in that year. The impact will be only about 4% impact on our subcontract.
I wanted to point that
So
out,
it's a-
but in terms of water rates and the price of water, I also wanted to mention that in Arizona, water rates are one way. Can you all hear me, or have I been muted? Can you hear me still? Okay, all right, so water rates, how water is paid for in the West is
different than how water is paid for in other areas. So for example, the Central Arizona project has an ad valorem tax. They have
14 cents per $100 of evaluation of property valuation. So people pay for water in their
property tax bills. If they're a member of the Central Arizona Groundwater Replenishment District, they pay an additional assessment. Most of the subdivisions in Gold
right now
Canyon
is about, I'm going to say much about $780 an acre foot, which is pretty steep actually for water. So the fact that the water bill is affordable, and I actually agree with what you're
affordable,
saying.
and I
not paying enough
actually
for water.
agree with
I agree with that statement. But there are other ways that
Agree
the
with-
money is collected from our residents and from the people who live in Arizona
Like-
pay for the
You're
water infrastructure.
saying-
that owns the water.
in the West, we do not
Yeah,
pay
you're
enough for
yeah, you're kind of breaking.
I
up a
agree with
little
that
bit.
statement.
Yeah, you're kind
But
of. breaking up
there
because
are other ways that money is collected from our rent and from the people who live in Arizona to pay for the water infrastructure that
sounds
brings the
like-
water here.
I'm just making a general statement in regard to ways of how do you get the residential people to conserve water? And sometimes the best way of finding out how to conserve water is finding out the currency of the individuals. And we know what the currency of individuals is. It's the dollar. So I'm just thinking, if we want to extend our water, if we want to extend our water usage, it may be a higher increased value. That's
Like
all.
the recording
And Ralvuca is going
Is
to
everybody on mute?
address demand
Let's-
management, water
that's-
conservation.
Speakers are on.
No, but I mean,
I didn't have enough time to put together, I'm looking at some
And-
projected
and-
growths in this area.
Ralvuca is
The
going,
number was actually lower than I thought it would be. And that might be another discussion for this group in the future. But as I look at it from 2020 to 2030, only showed about 500 more resident units in this area. And then from that. to
and
2040,
Ralvuca is going
just-
to directly address
accelerate.
demand management and water
So-
conservation.
I wish I could have found information on that. I did look it up, but I was having difficulty navigating it or getting it to print.
That's like a topic all in itself.
Right, that's kind of a topic. And then to the subdivision that I had enrolled into the replenishment district, I want to say it was approximately
That's like a-
$500 a year with paid in their property taxes. And I think that varied from when you were enrolled, what the rates were, and that it escalates as we go forward.
It
because
depends on how
the
much
cost-
water you use.
Yeah, how much you use, and also how much the water costs the punishment district should put into the punishment. So, but that might be that's a whole topic on its own. Charlie's got a question.
In a way, we're avoiding, I think, or missing a really big question. If we look at our overall area here in Canal County, a lot of the growth is expected to occur in superstition districts. And at least on the slide, I didn't see who will be the water provider there. But presumably, at the number of
You guys muted again. We can't, there we go. Thank you.
Yeah, and what I will say is that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The question is how are people planning from a water resource perspective
Or-
for superstition districts, which is like some 270 square miles of land owned by the state land department. It's in multiple jurisdictions. The answer to the question of who will serve it is that pretty much every water provider in this area will serve it. So Apache Junction will serve, Queen Creek will serve, Arizona Water Company will serve a portion. There's still a lot of discussions about how that will be carved out. But the overall answer to the question is that it's all going to be meshed in the assured
Water
water
supply program. So the assured water supply program will require every development in superstition districts to bring 100 years worth of water. And if there is not 100 years worth of groundwater available, they will have to get renewable supplies from somewhere else and bring it in,
to the system.
or the development will not occur.
desalinization.
Exactly. There will likely be desalinization in the next 10 to 20 years.
That, certificate of assured water that goes with these subdivisions was all put in place for consumer protection. The idea is that's gonna, and it, I can tell you, there's developers that think it's way too stringent. But we hit some real challenges down in my AMA with that. But that is the purpose, though, so that it will not, so that you do prove up that you have this supply of water for the 100 years. So, and it's true, it's done through modeling, which is how scientific is that? We do our best, to project it.
It's a very conservative modeling process.
Yeah. So,
Meaning
On the
that
other
it overestimates the demands for that.
On the other hand, when you answered the earlier question about efficiency or recovery, all those things are really over what time? So efficiency over a 1 year story, 2, 5, 10. And obviously it increases over time, I assume, the loss.
Well, they only measure the loss in the process of recharging it initially, so they don't determine it over time. So it's in the year that it's stored, they determine how much water is percolating into the ground, how much is lost to evaporation when it gets to the aquifer. Once it's in the aquifer, they do not assess what's happening from a recharge perspective. The groundwater modeling is another situation. So there's the hydrology that's constantly being updated. And so they're determining the physical availability of groundwater through these very sophisticated analytical models.
That time could be huge.
Yeah.
And there's, we have a number of areas within now where these recharge programs have proven to work, because we've seen actually well elevations or water elevations rise in areas. So we know we're getting water into the aquifer at some point. So and every area hydrology is just slightly different. So they have to use some different calculations for the area. So.
And I've seen some of those studies. I used to live in Colorado and we were plugged into the upper basin, where it gets probably even more complex.
Any more questions from the audience?
I do think we
I
have
have
to move
one.
on, though, because
Okay.
it is just about 10:30.
Okay, so why don't we move on?
Okay, we can definitely do that. So if we want to hop back to the presentation.
It should be this one.
I do think we have to go back into presentation mode, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
Current slide.
Yeah, but I think I need to share first.
No.
Well,
You actually have to
if we share
open the
that, we'll only
presentation.
share-
You gotta
You
Have to go into
gotta-
presentation.
then share it.
Current slide.
Then share that.
And then when you go to share, you're gonna select screen too.
Yeah, see what that does?
When it's sharing, it'll say at the top, the taskbar will pop up at the top.
Okay, then. That's my problem. Because I'm here. Okay, here's here. Now it needs to share. Because they're not gonna see it. And see, I don't have my thing.
Wonder how we did it last time. Oh. Okay, we could just do this one for now.
Okay.
And then you just click through that.
Okay.
Oh. Okay, cool. Woo, we are in the final stretch, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being patient. This is a lot of information, but what I'm going to go over is pretty easily digestible. So my name is Ralvuca Mihalcescu. I am the first and hopefully not the only water conservation specialist for Arizona Water Company. So I'm going to be going over the demand management programs and just a little bit of terminology. I personally interchange demand management program with the water conservation program. And as a brief synopsis, kind of my perspective on water conservation. So my goal as a water conservation specialist is to reduce waste in the form of leaks or water not being used purposefully, and increase efficiency on purposeful water use. So that's kind of my perspective for water conservation. I know there's sometimes water conservation is painted in a certain light, but that is my perspective going into it. Next slide, please. So I first wanted to give some background information on why Arizona Water Company is even looking to kind of further develop out their water conservation programs. So as was previously stated, Arizona Water Company is regulatorily managed by the Department of Water Resources, as well as the Arizona Corporation Commission. So for water conservation in our water systems that are in active management areas, we are regulated by these management plans. So they are 5 management plans. We are currently in the 3rd one, and they span through 2025. And so essentially, as we're looking to the 4th and the 5th management plan, there's a lot of information on these slides, but what I want to kind of water it down to is the fact that looking to the future, water conservation regulations are going to become more strict, AKA, you know, as a utility, we're going to be required to do more conservation efforts, and we're going to need to diversify what we're doing. So we cannot continue with what we're doing now, the status quo. And so next slide. Just to kind of paint more of a picture of Arizona Water Company, we mentioned that we're a 24 system wide company. We supply water to a diverse number of communities. So this is the state of Arizona. Everywhere you see blue, that's a water system. Everywhere you see a little house, that's where we have an actual brick and mortar building. So our strategy, you know, as we anticipate to have to build out more conservation programs, is a little bit different than what you're actually going to see in other private utilities in the state. So normally private utilities have a blanket conservation program that any one of their customers throughout the state can apply to. But because the communities that we serve are so diverse, we thought to go a little bit different of a route. We want to build unique conservation programs that are tailored to the communities that we serve if we actually want them to be effective. So if you go to the next slide, I just wanted to kind of point out the reach of our system. So we deliver as far north as Sedona, as far south as Bisbee. You're correct, Lisa.
Okay.
As far west as Ajo, go to the next slide, as far east as Lakeside, and then we have central locations like Casa Grande, Apache Junction, you know, different areas like that. So we serve communities that are so different, and we just did not think that a blanket program would be appropriate. And so next slide, we have basically built a template for the conservation programs and how we're going to build them in order to be effective. So every single conservation program kind of follows this template. We start with a comprehensive water use analysis or assessment. We look at the billing information, so basically the last 3 years of usage for a community to determine where the water is going and where the potential for savings is. And then we also look at what is currently being done by Arizona Water Company as well as the community to see what is the lay of the land, what is additional that needs to be brought on for conservation. We usually launch a digital marketing campaign with our conservation program that looks like a Facebook page, basically like a hub where we can keep all of our messaging. And Terri Sue on my first day kind of explained it as the digital marketing campaign is the vessel that holds all the conservation ethic or all the conservation messaging. And so that's kind of a visual that I want to kind of put out there. And the goal with the digital campaigns is to educate residents on how they can conserve water depending on what is appropriate for them and what they can kind of adopt into their lifestyles. So every campaign has that digital marketing effort, but we also want to build unique efforts for each communities. And in the next slides, I'll kind of go over, oh, you can keep it back. Sorry, Lisa, go back one. So by the end of this presentation, I'll go over which programs we've already launched, what those unique elements can look like. That way, if we want to get something started in Gold Canyon, which I personally would be very excited about, it kind of gives you a taste of what we would be able to do. And the big point that I want to make at the end of this slide is that all of our conservation efforts are a joint effort. We as a water utility do not know the unique personalities of each community, so we rely heavily on leadership feedback on what they think is going to be effective. We have a really funny story about what happened in Superior where we were completely off the mark, and we're so grateful that we were able to communicate with leadership and get something going there. But I'll tackle that little story later on as we dive into the comprehensive water use assessment, which we've already done for Gold Canyon. Next slide, please. So just to kind of paint a picture of really high level, these are some studies that have been conducted by different entities to determine what the average water use per person in one day in Arizona looks like. And so different organizations, the most recent one is AMWA, which is the Arizona Municipal Water Users Association. They're a central Arizona focused kind of entity, but they estimated when they did a study in 2019 that the average water use throughout the state for one person in one day is about 120 gallons. And the reason why I'm bringing up these numbers is a lot of people always ask me, what is normal water usage? And really it depends. But these are some studies that have been conducted to kind of help answer that question. So when we conducted our assessment for Gold Canyon, again, based on the billing information, the average water use for one person in one day is about 127 gallons. So very close to that state average. Before we move on from this slide, one thing I do want to point out, just kind of like a gold star for water conservation, is you'll see as the years continue and these studies go from 2010 to 2015 to 2019, although the population in Arizona has increased, average water use per person has decreased. And that's to kind of showcase that water conservation ethic has increased in Arizona, which is a really, really good sign. So next slide, please, Lisa. Diving more into this comprehensive water use assessment. This is a table just to kind of showcase kind of the mathematical logic behind this assessment. So this is a lot of information, but essentially we categorized all the water usage from the billing data and we created a benchmark. The benchmark is an average water use with 3 standard deviation on each side to kind of determine what the average use for each category was. And then we looked at how many connections were in each category, how many connections were above that benchmark, and by how much. All this to say that from an analytical perspective, where can we focus our water conservation efforts? Go to the next slide, Lisa. We ultimately decided that there are 2 potential areas in Cold Canyon specifically where there is potential for kind of saving some water, increasing efficiency. The first category is the residential sector. So we looked at single family dwellings and multifamily meters. What you'll notice here is there are a lot of connections that are above that benchmark, but not by much. So what that means is a lot of people are using a little bit more than the average. They're not using a ton more. So from a conservation perspective, strategy wise, that means that, we don't need a ton of people to reduce their water use on a day-to-day basis by a lot. Just little conservation actions here or there can have a really big impact. And then on the next slide, Lisa, please. The other area where there's potential to focus is the commercial sector, specifically the commercial irrigate. And so what that means is we don't have a lot of these accounts, but the accounts that we do have are using a pretty significant amount over the benchmark. And that means that there's a lot of potential for efficiency upgrades. So from a very analytical perspective, me going into what would a conservation program for Gold Canyon look like? Next slide, please, Lisa. I would say that we could focus on commercial water use, specifically with irrigation, and residential water use as well, specific to irrigation. And we have different ways that can kind of pan out, but that would be what I would be bringing to the table for what a conservation program for Gold Canyon would look like. One kind of fun thing, if you guys are interested in it, I know as an HOA, you're typically required to have specific plants in your landscape, specific numbers and all that. And so a potential program for the residents would be helping educate people on what those plants would be and how to best water them. That way they could meet that, have an amazing looking landscape, but also not have a huge increase in their water bill. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to go over some programs that we've actually launched. So we did launch a conservation program in Superior. We decided to focus on sustainability there. That was, again, from leadership feedback. The funny story about Superior is we did our analysis. The folks in Superior are using pretty significant amount from the state average. So we were thinking, great, we'll go in highlighting success stories, like look at how great Superior is doing with conserving their water. We met with leadership and they told us that the situation is a little bit different than what we thought. Their economic, socioeconomic factors in Superior causing them to use less water, not necessarily by choice. And so success stories would not go over well. Feedback from leadership is really, really important to building a successful conservation program. So we focused on sustainability because the mayor thought that would be really effective for the people. We launched Sustainability Elevate on Facebook. We have a landing page where people can go if they want to learn, why we've even done this. We have an FAQ page that is living, updated as people ask questions that are more, broad-based. We have a launch video that kind of is really amazing minute video for people to watch and kind of learn about this. And then we have a water journey. So the mayor thought that it would be really amazing for people to learn where they get their water from. So we put together a water journey video to educate people on this. The next slide. the individualized efforts. The mayor is really passionate in Superior about getting more plants in people's landscapes. So we partnered with the Boyce Thompson Arboretum and did a free plant giveaway, just because that was something that the mayor was super passionate about. And this is just kind of to showcase, you know, the extent of, you know, what we're willing to put on based on what you all think would be effective for the community. And then another really interesting thing that we did is we partnered, or we were able to get a contract with a gentleman named Gary Woodard, who actually does large scale commercial audits with an irrigation focus for Scottsdale and down in Tucson. He's been doing this for the past 6 to 7 years. So we got a contract with him, and he was able to do a landscape irrigation, about 4 or 5 of them for Superior. And we got great results out of those. Specifically, we were able to find a lot of leaks in irrigation systems for these some of these areas or these entities, which is great because, you know, fixing a leak will reduce your water usage and therefore reduce your bill potentially. So that's what we've got going in Superior. More of in a nutshell, if you want to go to the next slide, please, Lisa. We also launched a campaign in Casa Grande called Save It. The program in Casa Grande was a little bit bigger because the community was bigger. So the size of the program is proportional. So we're able to get Snapchat and Instagram going for them. But similarly, we have a landing page. And then we launched a WaterWise Outside program for them, where we work with the city to find ways to increase efficiency on the city managed areas, parks and stuff like that. And then we also are doing audits with Gary. And then if you want to go to the next slide, Lisa. The third one that we've launched is for Coolidge. That's every drop counts for a stronger tomorrow. All of these campaigns, logos, oh my goodness, slogans and logos were built together with the community. So they're all super unique. And then again, with Coolidge, it says WaterWise Outside. That was a typo. In Coolidge, they're really passionate about educating the youngsters about conservation. So we actually had our first ever 4th grade water festival a few days ago, which is heavily emphasized on teaching kids about water conservation, because again, that's something that the mayor is super passionate about. And so he wants it to happen, so my job is to make it happen. So that's Coolidge. The next slide, we have all these conservation, you know, programs that we run, but a big element of that is just getting engaged with the community. So these are some photos of different events that we've attended to not only, you know, speak about the conservation program, but also answer questions that people have about their water resources and just make sure that we're engaging with the community and addressing concerns as they come up. We've attended 14 events, which is a lot of work. But it's also a lot of fun. Luckily, I've got the energy for this type of stuff. It kind of brings me joy. But again, the goal is to get to the community. Next slide, please, Lisa. So if I've jazzed you guys enough about getting a conservation program in Gold Canyon, which hopefully I have, these would be what the next steps would look like. Essentially, we want to have another meeting, maybe a smaller meeting with community leaders. And we can start talking about these fun elements like, you know, what would a logo look like? What would a brand look like? How can we get conservation on people's minds in Gold Canyon? Because conservation, you know, I argue, but, you know, I'm a specialist. I would argue that conservation is a really impactful way to help people manage the resources for their community. So yeah, and then if you go to the next slide, this is kind of like our summary. All this to say, Terri Sue.
So this is kind of like our overall concept. You know, we want to put a balance between reliability and sustainability. So we want to implement company-wide demand management program. We want to protect our existing potential water rights.
Now we want to invest in water management infrastructure. We want to reuse 100% of the effluent, and we want to go on additional water supplies, specifically with the water supplies. So it all
Kind of works together. It's complex, but at a high level, it's kind of
our vision.
Yeah, and so now if anyone has any questions, this is our staff at the Casa Grande office. You know, I know that you see us here, but there are so many more employees that work really hard to make sure that water gets to our communities. So we just want to highlight some of the people behind the scenes that aren't here today, but we represent them and they do a lot of hard work for us. So
I have
Any
one
questions?
question.
we've got 15 minutes. I'm pretty proud of my timing on that. We zipped through that.
I have one question. I used to live up along Cloudview, and we had our own well, and we drilled, and I think, it's been 5 or 6 years ago, but it was only going down for like 400 feet. But now, some of the people I'm talking to up there, they have to go down to 1,500 feet to get water. I was just kind of curious if is the wells that you guys drill, that have, where you have your wells at, is that have the same issues too, or do you have that, difference? Over?
We pump from around 500 foot depth. Most of our wells are drilled 1,500 feet deep anyways, but the groundwater levels haven't changed significantly.
They have not.
They have not like they have in residential wells.
Yeah, and I would guess is that the reason for that is that the
Residential wells are up,
in the mountains. And the
wells
wells,
that we pump are down in the alluvial basin. And so it's a different hydrology. We talked about earlier how the hydrology varies dramatically. So when you're at the edge of the aquifer,
the
the
drawdown
drawdown is going to be more dramatic than in the deeper parts.
The area you're talking about is very, almost like the building.
Yes. Yeah. It's all the way up there.
Increased number of houses up there.
Yep.
Mhm.
On wells.
and there are a lot of, there is a lot of discussion in Arizona about what we would call exempt wells. And these wells that are associated with a particular home are what we call an exempt well. They're not regulated at the level that a municipal public water supply well is regulated. So that is an issue, but it's more of an economic issue because it's not that there isn't ample groundwater. It's just that those wells are located in areas that the aquifer is very shallow and they're not highly regulated.
Do all these individual wells have to meter and give an annual report? I know in Colorado, we had to do that.
Exempt wells inside of an active management area have to provide an annual report. Outside of active management areas, they do not have to. But inside active management areas, they do.
Along the San Pedro, for example, that's not here.
That's outside the active management.
There's a, if you go to Department of Water Resources, I think it's called Well 55, is a page in which and every red dot is a well in Arizona. And it's pretty effective and it gives you an idea about how many wells, and then you can actually draw down to an exact area. It actually tells you the well number, tells you the last report if it was one that was reported. And then you can see ones that are in active management areas and ones that are not. But it's pretty
Okay,
powerful.
well-
I've used it in some presentations in the past. So.
That answered my question then. One other question really quick. And just a comment, you have a pumping station right across from Peralta School on Peralta Road. And not recently, but in the past, it is sometimes early in the morning, the pumps will take off and make a lot of noise. I was just wondering if that's been fixed or if you know anything about that. The other thing is, I noticed too that they're laying pipe up to the new park up at Peralta Road. Is that going to, change our water pressure and that sort of thing? Or is that coming from AZ Water and that sort of thing? Or do they do their own wells up there?
Peralta Road right now.
That's the park, the regional park.
Oh, okay, the regional park, okay. Yeah, no, that's not ours. They have a well,
Yeah.
okay.
There must be a county, you must have an independent water right.
Uh-huh.
Another question?
Not a water question, but a statement. Boyce Thompson Arboretum plant sale is actually on March the 12th, so there's a plug.
Ooh, the plant sale at the Arboretum?
Yeah.
Yes, I will be there on the 19th for the resident of Superior sale. So, yeah.
Ralvuca, I have a question for you. I understand that, and as you go to these different communities and you get, speak with the leaders and stuff, I understand that the city of Casa Grande, when all the study was done, wasn't the city one of the largest water users in in your district in that area?
There was.
So
one-
there's the target.
You were gonna say, we'll start with the 4.
So you, if we express some interest in the game, you would come out and help us.
Absolutely. Yes, we could build
That's a job.
something. Yes.
I have one
We
other
told
one.
them to come out here.
One of you, I don't remember who, said something I've heard about it before, raising one of the dams. And of
Bartlett
course,
Dam, yeah.
you've presumably done all the hydrological studies. There must be excess water coming down the stream. So that you can.
It's a little different than that.
So SRP is the entity that's developing that project. And they have actually done a lot of hydrologic studies. So, and SRP has a whole staff of climatologists and hydrologists. And if they did not believe that building that dam
Would result in water supply, we would not even be studying.
But
What I would suggest
is that you bring them down here to talk about, there's a lot of information.
And what really has triggered that discussion for them is the sediment that has fallen in against the dam has cut back the volume.
Oh.
So,
Of course.
and to remove the sediment, it's just financially.
$100 million.
So this is the solution to that.
So Horseshoe is taking most of that, I assume.
Horseshoe is where
Yeah, is where the sediment.
But instead of digging that out, they discovered that it's less expensive to
Raised
Bartlett and inundate that area.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we have time for, I was secretly told that we have time for a couple more questions.
If there are none, I'd like to thank the panelists. They've provided a lot of useful information on a critically important topic. So I want to thank the community members who participated and be sure to follow up on their availability to answer any other questions you may have. So without any other remarks, I'd like to again thank the panelists and Maxine Brown for putting together such a very well-informed, instructive panel for us. Thank you all very much.
Yes.
My pleasure, our pleasure, I think.
This was great. Thank you so much.
Sorry for the technical difficulties.
Just send it to me. I can get that.
Okay, you can stop recording. Stop recording.
And email address for me. So.